Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to get started here. Thank you for being patient with our technical difficulties. I just wanted to take a moment to let everybody know how we're running our time here. In a moment, I'm going to hand things over to Norm Jacknis, our Director of Program Development at IdeaScale, who's going to tell you about why citizen engagement is valuable and how you can create your own successful citizen engagement program. He'll lead that conversation for the next 30 minutes or so, and during that time, I'll be monitoring the questions feed. But we're going to try and hold all questions till the end so that Norm can respond to each one of them live. So just type them in here to the questions feed, and we'll make sure you get them answered. Also, as a special offer today, we're offering a free 30-minute consult with Norm about your citizen engagement program to the first 3 attendees here to email me with citizen engagement in the subject line. So if that's something that interests you, if you're interested in the 30-minute consult, just email jessica.day@ideascale.com with citizen engagement in the subject line. And if you're one of the first 3, we'll set up a time to work with Norm. And I also just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, so it will be possible to access it after the event is over. We'll send out notice to everyone who registered with a link where they can find it. And of course, if you have any questions about IdeaScale or today's event, just go ahead and forward them to me. So Norm, let's take us away here.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for being here, and we apologize for the technical glitches of incompatibility between Microsoft and GoToMeeting of all things. Of course, as you know, some of you have been involved with technology. It worked perfectly when Jessica and I practiced it last week. Anyway, here we go. Successful citizen engagement. First thing, we might want to think back about how people used to be engaged, and there's the classic, there we go, a New England town meeting that is in a lot of people's minds as to how you had really participation of active citizens. You might be interested that the New England town meeting still goes on today. And in fact, there are other versions of it for places that are a little bit larger than New England towns. This is a picture from Philadelphia City Hall, in which there's an attempt to get people to come out for public hearings. This was actually a lot of people in the audience. This was one about a very sensitive topic about violence in the streets. The problem is, in the 21st century, is how can you get that engagement of the town meeting to scale up from a couple hundred or a couple of thousand people in one location to many more than that. And even when you have meetings like Philadelphia City Council did, how do you hear from the people who don't show up at those meetings, but who will show up on election day and decide how well your government is doing? So when President Obama came to office in the beginning of 2009, he had this whole open government initiative, which is actually how IdeaScale got started in this. And with IdeaScale as a platform, the president launched feedback platforms for citizens for 23 different federal agencies. So what I want to go through here is explain why, in this day and age, with the ability to scale up, you'd want to engage citizens. And I'm going to go from the larger picture to perhaps some smaller picture, but still the range of reasons. Number one is it's part of quality of life. There's a book from several years ago in business called The Experience Economy. I would suggest that what they're talking about there is that the goods and services, the kinds of things corporations used to do, were no longer enough. And instead, what really differentiates people, or companies rather, is the experience of being a customer there. And the equivalent thing is the experience of being a resident, a citizen of a city, a state, or a nation. I point out, and I won't give some examples, I don't want to name names, but you probably all can think of people who have done everything right. In fact, probably did what people want. But because the experience of being under their governance was not a positive and memorable one, those public officials didn't really get the kind of approval from the public that they needed. And this is particularly important in this economy now as it's developing. And hopefully we'll get that next one, Jessica. Okay, there we go. Because it's for cities and states, in some respects, even countries now, with some of the talk about corporations moving their headquarters, this is a survival question. When a lot of people can work anywhere they want to, they can take their work with them in an economy in which a lot of people are making their living remotely and with intangible services. they're going to choose based on quality of life, and it's important to remember that quality of life includes that citizen experience. It's not just a question of what kind of cultural activities or other things that might be in an area. Okay, number 2. This is a little bit slower than we have it directly, but anyway, here we go. The second reason is to understand the priorities of citizens. And this is something that you've seen most with budgets. So this is a picture from the city of Calgary, Canada, which has brought the public into deciding about how to spend the money. New York City and Chicago, Vallejo, California, all across North America, in fact, there have been various ways in which a large or a small part of the budget is decided with crowdsourcing. In the state of Washington, they did this, and they had 2,000 ideas posted for cutting the budget, places where people were willing to cut the budget, and 130,000 votes were cast. So obviously there's a lot of interest in this. But it's not just the budget. So the original, you've probably seen variations of this thing with the original effort to encourage people to report things like potholes and lights that are out and things like that, is a piece of software called Fix My Street that was put together by a nonprofit in England. This is from Birmingham, England. And the issue here that a lot of people in government will say is, I already don't have enough resources to meet the demands that are there. Why would I want to be encouraging people to give me more? Well, this is where the full citizen engagement can come in. Instead of sort of throwing up your hands and saying, I can't do it, and getting everybody angry with you, what you can do in this sort of situation is ask the residents of your city to help vote on which of these problems is the most important. And then you can go back and say, look, we have limited resources because there's limited taxes, and as a result, we're going to go and fix the problems that arise to the top based on what the citizens are telling us. Reason number 3, to get new ideas and innovations. So, one of the things that is happened a lot in the private sector and also now in the public sector is this thing called the open innovation movement. You've got examples of places like Netflix giving out $1 million prize to an outside group that figured out the best way to identify the next movie you're going to want to see. Procter & Gamble is probably the poster child for the open innovation movement. And you can see the quotes from their former R&D vice president. And he's saying, we have 7,500 people in our R&D division, great scientists, but there are another 1.5 million throughout the rest of the world who can contribute to us. And so as a result, P&G has found that now with open innovation, 50% of their innovations come from external sources, including the fabulously successful Swiffer product. So this has taken off in a lot of ways in the private sector, and it has application as well to the public sector. So as part of what President Obama did, he wanted to have new ideas, and here you have the State Department of all places. This is something you might not think of first. Open to new ideas. You have NASA in their Mars program encouraging the public to come out and to give them help, if you will, and the suggestions on how to go about exploring Mars. Madison, Wisconsin did the same thing, where the people are proposing ideas to help make the community a healthy and vibrant one. And you'll see, I'm not sure how clear it is on top, they actually combine this with their budget conversations. Interesting combination. And City of Ottawa, sustainability campaign. Sustainability is one of those issues that's a combination of technical expertise and public priorities. So having the public contribute new ideas and innovative solutions is an important thing, and they were quite successful in this. And then the U.S. government, in a more general way, has called upon expertise by having these challenges. So various federal agencies will go out and challenge the general public to come up with solutions to ideas, solutions rather for problems. This is spread worldwide. So last year, a group called Making All Voices Count, primarily in developing countries, was set up so that they can get ideas on how to improve things there. And as you can see, it's been enormously successful, close to 50,000 users, a lot of votes. This is the kind of thing that you will see growing all over the world, even in places which don't have the kind of internet connectivity that we take for granted. Reason number 4, to improve legislation and regulations. This is an extension almost of the idea of contributing innovations, having the public contribute innovations to the government. But it's actually focused very much on legislation. There have been some examples of this in the U.S. and the state of California, but the one that's probably most interesting to me is in Finland. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to Finland. I have. It can get pretty cold in the winter. Snowmobiles are a big deal there. And so as part of the effort to create new laws and regulations about snowmobiles, the government of Finland brought in citizens to help write the laws and regulations. It was quite successful. Reason number 5, to predict public reactions to proposals. Now, there are various kinds of things that you've seen, prediction markets, in some of them where people actually have to put money down. They've actually been fairly accurate in terms of predicting the outcomes of elections, but here we're talking about helping you figure out what the public's reaction might be to proposed policy. And there are various ways in which you can do this using citizen engagement tools. I'm going to point this out. So I showed this picture before. This is the Open Government Initiative from President Obama. In 2009, it was quite an embarrassment to him when certain issues came up as being fairly popular. And a lot of people were saying, oh, see, that's the problem with all this open government stuff. I frankly think that ultimately, if you look back on it, the thing that was embarrassing, which was the idea of decriminalizing marijuana, turned out to be a leading indicator of where the public has been going if you look at it 5 years, 6 years later. Reason number 6, to get help delivering services. Now, this is really going a little bit further than I think you normally would think about. But it's not just citizen engagement in terms of, well, here's an idea, you guys go ahead and do it, but here's an idea and we can help do it. And so you've seen examples of this in sort of the nonprofit sector. Wikipedia is probably the best known example worldwide where people are contributing to other people's knowledge. There are other examples as well, in even more obscure areas. So Zooniverse, which is focused on science and, if you will, citizens engaging with each other and building science, has 1 million members now and been quite successful. And the National Archives has activated what they call citizen archivists. The National Archives has an incredible, large collection that has not been properly described. And they're asking basically to help citizens, to actually ask citizens to help them do the work that would be needed to get all this stuff properly done. And people are interested in this, and it's a value to other citizens who want to go to the National Archives. In England, they've taken this to, I won't say an extreme, that's probably the wrong word, but they've really developed this very well, and they call it co-production. This is an example from the Lambeth City Council in England. And on the right, there are some reports about what they call co-production, which is citizens providing public services to each other. By the way, this deck will be available to you, so don't worry about having to write everything down. You'll be able to sort of get these references later. Reason number 7, to gain their understanding about the realities of government. People don't often talk about this. There's a lot of thought on the part of government that, well, this is a good way for us to get people to tell us what's on their minds. Okay, fair enough. But it's also a way for citizens to begin to tackle with the issues that you deal with every day. And so one of the things that happened in Oakland County, Michigan, they created this group they called Net Volunteers, which are citizens who are involved in providing ideas and services to each other, and things like recreational advice, that kind of thing. But what happened was these citizens became a lot more sophisticated about the complexity of government, about some of the issues you have to deal with, but how it's not so easy. And this was actually something that the county executive there was very appreciative when he went out campaigning. Reason number 8, to regain the trust and support of citizens. I don't need to tell anybody who's been in this country that public trust in government has gone down dramatically. This is from Pew Research. You can see, going back to the Eisenhower administration down to where it is today. It's been up and down a little bit for various reasons, but the general trend line is not good. Even at the beginning of this year, there was a Washington Post story. The polls find little faith in nation's leaders. I might point out You see the same stories elsewhere. This is another headline from Macau, which is sort of a self-governing entity in China. Poll results show decline in government. And by the way, this is not just in these two places. This is a report that was published under the UN auspices, and the beginning of the abstract says, the decline of trust in government has been a critical issue in many parts of the world. This is an issue. People's expectations have gone up. I try to remind people of something, well, hopefully this next screen will come on. There we go. That the internet has changed expectations. This is a version of something called the Clue Train Manifesto that was issued about 15 years ago by some leading scholars of the internet. And it was an attempt to tell corporations the game had changed. Your customers are much more active. This whole idea of the prosumer that was even earlier an idea than this really has some profound implications for how you have to operate. All I've done with this is to take the first few of those. There are others you can read on the blog post. And take the first few of those and just change the word company to or business to governing and customer to citizens. Otherwise, the same statements are true. And governing consists of conversations. And there are various ways in which your citizens have expectations that a lot of public officials haven't yet met, but can do now through the internet as well. Okay, let's go over it quickly. Now that you have a bunch of different reasons why you might want to do citizen engagement, let's go over some of the things that you need to do to ensure a successful citizen engagement. So first of all, this is going to take a little bit longer than, there we go. For those of you wondering how this is happening, I'm actually controlling Jessica's computer.
It's a very strange experience.
First of all, you have to be honest about this. There are some preconditions that make engagement unlikely, and I've sort of shown these pictures here. If your technology in your community or in the jurisdiction that you want to cover is insufficient, it's just not going to be possible, obviously, to use the internet for that. If there's no sense of community, if there's no minimum level of trust, if the public officials still view themselves as King Henry VIII, if you're in a war zone where people have a lot of other things on their minds, you know, these are all things that are going to really make it hard to create real citizen engagement. You know, and having said that, there are some good examples. In the midst of the Kenyan Civil War a few years ago, they had some of this going on. And also, on the other hand, while we don't normally think of this in the United States, there are some places in the U.S. where people are not likely to be engaged just because of the nature of the life that they are living in right now. But I think the other thing is that even when you're successful, you need to be realistic about what that success is about. So there's the 99-1 rule, and there's some variations on this. It originally came out of observing the behavior of people who were using Wikipedia. So 1% of that audience of people using Wikipedia really were the people who were running the show and most active on it every day. And then you had another 9% who contributed from time to time. They saw a grammatical error, if they saw a date that was wrong or something like that that they knew about, they would fix it. And then the other 90% were there just to use it. They were the lurkers. Now, there have been some other studies about this, and you can, if you're really good, you can switch this ratio down to 70, 20, and 10 instead of 99 and 1. But still, only a minority of the target audience is going to be as active as you would like. So that's okay. That's still a lot more people than you're getting now, getting involved now, but you have to be realistic about this. First question that you need to answer in order to be successful is, who is the target audience? It may not be everybody. It might be. It might even be people beyond the jurisdiction that you're responsible for. I think the answer will depend upon what your goals are and how complicated the problem is. Obviously, more complex problems may call for narrow audiences. It really depends, but this is something that has to be worked out ahead of time. And you also, as part of thinking about the target audience, you need to think about what conditions lead to successful crowdsourcing. You know, I'm sure a number of you have already heard about this book called The Wisdom of the Crowds. The author went through and did a really thorough study of what allowed for the success of using crowdsourcing. You know, what were the conditions? These are two of those that I think are particularly relevant here. One is to bring a great variety of perspectives on the problem. So people have their individual knowledge they're bringing, and they're coming from different places. So even though none of them is the absolute expert, they're all bringing a little bit of expertise that collectively adds up to something important. And the other thing that's very important is that each person's judgment is independent of the judgment of others. So you really want to avoid a kind of groupthink or mob psychology in this situation. And there are ways to set up your citizen engagement so that is minimized. Getting people to the party. So in a sense, you need to think of yourself as a party host, and you need to get people there. And you've seen the classic line, if you build it, they will come. Well, sorry, that doesn't work in this world. And instead, like any other initiative, this needs to be publicized using all media, not just the internet. But it shouldn't be hyped. So, rather than saying we're doing the greatest thing for citizens since the Declaration of Independence, call it an experiment so the public's expectations are also realistic. Whoops. And sorry for the slow-moving cartoon. If you don't do it, you'll build it, they will come, but it will be for prison, not for the citizen engagement. Sorry. Okay. Starting the conversation. You, as the government officials, need to get the conversation started, and I've listed here some of the things that ought to be in what you're asking citizens to do. Obviously, it needs to be balanced. You want to really make sure people feel that all points of view are welcome. You'll be able to aggregate those so that if you will, the more outlier point of views are not necessarily dominant. On the other hand, you want to hear what people have to say. Sometimes those outliers have good ideas. I think you also, there's important points here. I'm not going to read them all, but in terms of important points here, I think that the last two are very important. Don't post something that's very politically sensitive unless you're prepared to do something with the results. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more later. And you need a balance between things that are too broad and too narrow. Sometimes people are very narrowly focused. One of the things that was done with crowdsourced legislation in California was on probate legislation. And the legislator did that was, I suppose, a little surprised that not more people signed up to help him. I don't know why he might have been surprised about that. But you also can make it too broad. So you want to have something, in the middle, and there's some judgment there in terms of being able to widen it enough so people are interested and can contribute ideas, but not too wide. Okay. Next. Sometimes, by the way, we're used to seeing a lot of these open-ended conversations in terms of citizen engagement. It doesn't always have to be that way. This was a situation in which the government wanted to structure the conversation. So this was an open space plan in a large suburban area where they were buying up properties to prevent overdevelopment. And they actually had a plan with a set of criteria. And so the citizens were asked to propose properties that should be bought by the government. But they were asked to evaluate them against these criteria. So it wasn't an open-ended conversation. They were asked to evaluate them against the criteria, and then other members of the public could respond to each of those proposals and say whether or not they agreed or didn't agree that that property met the criteria. So you can structure these if you want to. Things can get off track, and this is the kind of thing everybody worries about. Obviously, there can be problems of tone, of things that are just merely critical or using foul language or whatever. There are issues of misinformation that can get spread. Obviously, there are technical issues. We had technical issues today, right? So these things happen, and sometimes they can frustrate people. Oftentimes, government officials are worried that the whole conversation is going to get hijacked. And if you actually have a sufficient number of people involved in the conversation, that's less likely to happen. If you have too few participants, then you're not getting the value of the crowdsourcing effort to begin with, and it might very well be hijacked. You need to keep up the conversation. This is something people often forget. They put it out there, and then that's it. Well, every one of these conversations needs some degree of moderating. Remember, think of yourself as the host of the party. After a certain point, if you hear a lull in conversations, you need to get it started again, as long as you want the party to keep going. You should be looking at analytics, and not at the end of the process, but even during it, so you can help guide it. It's a little bit like knowing how to steer a car. Well, you're steering this conversation to some degree to at least make sure that the conversation keeps going and you're getting good ideas. Sometimes you want to make sure that you understand what people are saying. So you should find ways to confirm what they mean. You can either do it publicly or you can even reach out individually to people. And obviously you should sustain the engagement as long as it's useful to you, and then stop. then find a way to close it. And otherwise, you run into these kinds of problems. So here's an example where the engagement went stale. The most recent, seem to be some good ideas here, but the most recent idea was from a year ago. When people come onto your website and see that, they think, this isn't working. Even worse, you have this situation. In the state of Texas, they had this Texas red tape challenge to get the citizens to tell them how to get rid of red tape. So if you bring up this page, which is still on the web, and you go to the bottom, policy focus area ideas, 0. Nothing's there. It's really hard to believe that Texans don't have ideas on new ideas on how to deal with red tape. But clearly, this was over as far as the government was concerned. They didn't do anything with it. You have another example to get people to, one second, to get people to stay at the party, you also want to think a little bit like a game designer. And I think that it's really the mechanics behind games. I'm not talking about it being an adventure game, but it's measuring behavior in real time. It's rewarding certain actions. And it's also not just about badges or leaderboards. People have a variety of motivations, and you need to make sure that the engagement speaks to all of those different motivations so you get that diverse set of people. Big question, what are you going to do with all this stuff once it happens? I mean, it's not just a feel-good thing, and so if you don't do something, people will be unhappy. They're not going to feel good. They're going to be just increasing their cynicism about government. So I think what you need to do is you need to explain what you'll be doing with the ideas that you get, and how the engagement process helped you to govern better. This doesn't mean you need to take what people have written exactly. Remember, going back to the Food Train Manifesto, this is now a conversation, but you have a right to participate in that conversation too. So you can refine these ideas as long as you explain to people what the result was of their part of the conversation. The headline here, I think, says it all. Be prepared to act or don't ask. So I mentioned earlier how 130,000 votes were cast in the state of Washington on ideas for reducing the budget. And none of them were implemented. And everybody was left unsatisfied. And the people in the government said, oh, well, there are all kinds of federal and state issues, or those kinds of other issues, political issues, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it was, there was always a reason not to do it. And all I can say is that if you're going to go to the effort of engaging citizens, you have to actually be prepared to act somehow on what they're saying. Otherwise, don't start the engagement. It'll just make things worse. Okay, and the other question we hear a lot is, who will get this done? I don't have any resources to do this, and how are we going to manage this, and all those kinds of things. Well, I think that obviously there's a role that you as public officials need to play, but you don't have to have your paid staff doing it all. And you can get volunteers from outside the paid staff. If anybody's online who's an elected official or part of the immediate staff of an elected official, you probably have people who worked in your campaigns who are looking for something useful to do between campaigns. This is some way they can help you moderate the conversations and help keep things going. If you're an agency, oftentimes you'll have advisory boards or other folks who can help play that role. And if you've got nobody else, see who's active at the beginning of the conversation, and if they seem reasonable, reach out to them and say, hey, could you play a little bit more of a leadership role here? That's how the Wikipedia thing developed. The idea behind this is that you don't need to do this all the old-fashioned way as a big bureaucratic initiative. You can use the network to build your network. In fact, you should, to some degree, think of citizen engagement, your initial citizen engagement project, as a startup. So it shouldn't be a workload on folks who are already overworked. You can keep it simple. Don't have long, drawn-out planning cycles. I was involved in one with the White House and GSA, where they thought through so many of the issues over a period of a year and a half that by the time the year and a half went by, they had lost interest in doing it at all. And let it grow organically. You're not going to make this a volunteer effort and grow from the top down. Okay, here are the key takeaways to summarize. We can now scale up collaboration and participation. It's possible, in a sense, to recreate that New England town meeting on the internet. And it is a great, citizen engagement is a great way to get help and new ideas, to test proposals, to understand priorities of voters, and educate citizens about what real-life governing is all about. It's also a way to convince a skeptical public that you really care and they have a role in their own governance. And all of this together, frankly, makes it easier for you to govern better. So with that, thank you very much. I try to run through this fairly quickly so we'd have still a little bit of time for questions. Jessica, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so like Norm said, it's a great opportunity for you to add your questions here to the feed, and also just a reminder if anybody's interested in sending along an email to me, jessica.day@ideascale.com, with citizen engagement in the subject line, you'll get a free 30-minute consult with Norm for your program. I have a question here. Oh, is there an example of a city that's lost out because of lack of citizen engagement?
That's lost people because of citizen engagement?
Yeah.
Not solely. As I said, it's part of the overall experience of being in cities, but you can certainly see across the country there's been shifts in population, and there are places that have lost significant population. I think, I showed Philadelphia before. They are turning around now, but they used to be a city of 2.5 million. I think they're down to 1.5 million. Of course, everybody's heard about Detroit. You've heard about a lot of other areas that have lost population. Part of this has to do, obviously, with economic changes, but other cities that went through economic changes managed to turn around and got their people involved in helping to sort of plan the future of the city. So it's not the economic problems are not 100% deterministic.
We've got a question here. How do you see using this approach and applying it to a university or an academic environment?
Well, actually, we didn't talk about that here. There have been a variety of examples of that kind of thing in universities. It very much applies. I'm actually a trustee of a local college, and so clearly, I think universities understand that they are now in a situation where there are a lot of forces that are buffeting them, and a lot of universities trying to figure out where they're going to go in the future. It would be great if they actually brought in their students, their faculty, other people who have something to, business people, whatever, every people have something to add about what that future of the university ought to be and what ideas they have. And we have some good examples. In fact, I think if you go to the IdeaScale website, there's some examples there from Columbia University.
And we've got some other ones too. I think Georgetown's used it, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. We've got quite a few examples of it. But I think some of the same practices that you said apply here. You got to, building it's not enough. You got to communicate it. You got to stir the pot. We have a question here in terms of the Washington Commission. The Washington Commission conducted the effort, but only the legislature has the ability to institute the changes. So should the commission not try to engage the citizens to inform the legislator? How do you make sure that the legislature follows through?
Well, okay. I mean, this gets into a question of local politics, I suppose. But obviously, it would be nice to get some sense from the legislature that they're willing to listen to this. You would think, as elected officials, they would be, but you never know. I think my point there, though, is even if you are trying to make a proposal to the legislature, which is a perfectly fine idea, then the citizens who are participating need to know that this is what you're asking them to do, so that this is not going to be final law. You're asking them to help contribute to a report, and that's okay. As long as it's realistic and not just, well, here's your chance to tell the whole government what to do, and they're going to do it, when that's actually not what's really being set up.
If you have questions that you want to ask citizens regularly, what's the best way to keep that content fresh and then archive the old content?
Well, you can certainly have a general forum and encourage people to come there on a regular basis. There are various ways, various tools you can use for that to happen. There are obviously, in addition to traditional media, there's email, there are RSS feeds, there are all kinds of ways that you can notify people that there's something new that you want them to respond to. That'll work. You just need to make sure some of the old ideas that are no longer as part of an active conversation are sort of archived off. And I think actually that way, in a sense, if you want to keep this conversation going on forever, that's a very good idea, is to establish an obvious place where people can always go to see what's the latest thing being discussed.
We have a question here about how do you target specific demographics? She's concerned that they aren't receiving a broad enough response, concerned about the age and income demographic might be skewed.
So I'm not 100% certain what the question is, but I think to some degree it has to do with this traditional question of the digital divide, which is both an economic divide as well as a behavioral one. And so obviously not everybody has the same access to the internet as conveniently. One of the things that I was involved with on a citizen engagement effort in the city of Los Angeles was to get the library involved, so that people who didn't have their own computers, or even seniors who felt a little bit uncomfortable about using computers, had somebody in the public library who could help them sit down and participate in this effort. And there are other organizations as well that people are involved with, whether it's churches or senior groups or whatever, where you can get their aid to help people participate.
And I think actually there's a case study in terms of IdeaScale where a local government used our API to create an on-site version of IdeaScale where without creating a profile or anything else, you could vote on the ideas that were in this community if you went to the local city offices. So even if you didn't have a computer at home, you could bridge the digital divide on site.
You can do it actually everywhere. I mean, frankly, one of the things that the internet provides, and it's especially relevant to citizen engagement, is it's everywhere. So, there should be some kind of kiosk or screen available to people in every public location, whether it's a library or city office buildings, state office buildings, whatever, or schools, where a lot of parents come to pick up kids, in a lot of places where there's an opportunity in a public space for people to get access to the internet if you make it available.
We've got a question here. What local city department would best benefit from increasing citizen engagement?
Well, I will tell you that the two that I have always thought were the most difficult turn out to be among the most frequent users of this. So that would be the police departments and the city planning departments. The city planning department is obvious because this is a way of getting people's ideas about how the future of their own neighborhoods would look like, or their own city. And it's also a way, frankly, for the election officials to understand whether or not there's going to be a significant pushback on major new development ideas. They'd rather discover that early than late in the process. And the police are actually even using this in various places around the country as for ideas on how to better deal with various kinds of crime problems. There are, I think every department in one way or another can use it. So but I give you those two examples because probably not the first ones you would think of, because in various degrees, both police and planners have traditionally had this aura of professionalism where, how could the public have anything to say about this?
We've got time for one more question here, but that doesn't mean if you have other questions, go ahead and email them to me. We'll make sure that Norm follows up in response to you for those questions. And of course, if you're interested in the consult, email me with citizen engagement in the subject line. I guess the question that we're going to close with here is anonymous versus non-anonymous submission for citizens.
This is a classic one, and it really depends on what you want to achieve. I think that if you're trying to look for ideas, probably the anonymous is fine. Although you can have a combination where people can be told if they want to have follow-up, and they have to actually provide some information. But on the other hand, the reason for anonymity in that sort of situation is that you don't want other people to be influenced by it, and you also want people not to fear that the crowd will turn against them, and some idea this way, if it's anonymous and people complain, that they're not quite as embarrassed. In a lot of other situations, you're not going to want to have that anonymity, because you're going to want to be able to respond to people, or if it's something coming from special interest groups, you're going to want to understand that. There are uses for both. It depends on sort of what you're trying to achieve, and this is part of what goes into the planning of these efforts. Figuring out the answers to these questions.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for the lively conversation from our people who added these questions in here at the end. Thank you, Norm, for presenting.
Thank you all, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you folks as well.
Great. Well, have a nice day, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.